There's a fruit tree sitting in backyards across Eastern Europe and parts of Asia that produces more vitamin C than oranges, more antioxidants than blueberries, and keeps fruiting for half a century without replanting. And you've probably never heard of it. It's called sea buckthorn. Yeah, I know. Terrible name. Sounds like something that would ruin a beach vacation. Not revolutionize your garden, but this spiky orange-berried nightmare of a plant might be the most underrated food crop in the Northern Hemisphere. So why isn't it in every garden center in America? Why aren't influencers making smoothie bowls out of it? And more importantly, should you be planting it right now? Keep watching and find out. Let's start with the basics, because sea buckthorn doesn't exactly scream superfood when you first look at it. Picture a shrub, maybe 6 to 12 feet tall, covered in silvery green leaves and absolutely loaded with thorns. Seriously, this plant is basically barbed wire with a root system. The branches look like they're auditioning for a horror movie about haunted hedges. But here's where it gets interesting. In late summer, female plants produce these bright orange berries. Not the deep purple of blueberries, or the cheerful red of strawberries. These are aggressive, almost neon orange, the kind of orange that makes you wonder if they're real. And they grow in clusters so dense that entire branches look like they've been dipped in orange paint. The scientific name is Hippophae rhamnoides, which roughly translates to shining horse, because apparently ancient Greeks noticed that horses fed on the leaves developed shinier coats. Not exactly the most exciting origin story, but we'll take it. Now, before you start thinking this is just another exotic plant with mediocre results, let's talk numbers. 1 cup of sea buckthorn berries contains about 12 times the vitamin C of an orange. 12 times. That's not a typo. It's got 7 times the vitamin C of a lemon. The only commonly available fruit that comes close is acerola cherry, and good luck finding that at your local farmer's market. But vitamin C is just the opening act. These berries are loaded with omega-7 fatty acids, which most people have never even heard of, because they're incredibly rare in the plant kingdom. Omega-3s and omega-6s get all the attention, but omega-7 is the underachiever sibling that turns out to be secretly brilliant. Sea buckthorn oil is used in high-end skincare products that cost more than your monthly grocery bill. The antioxidant content is off the charts too. We're talking flavonoids, carotenoids, and phenolic compounds with names that sound like rejected Transformer characters. Beta-carotene levels that rival carrots. Vitamin E that puts almonds to shame. And here's the kicker. Unlike some fruits that are all hype and no substance, these benefits actually hold up under scientific scrutiny. There are hundreds of peer-reviewed studies on sea buckthorn. This isn't some wellness blogger's fever dream. So if this plant is basically a multivitamin that grows on a bush, why isn't everyone planting it? Well, that's where things get complicated, and kind of hilarious. First off, sea buckthorn is dioecious. That's a fancy botanical term, meaning you need both male and female plants to get fruit, kind of like kiwis or holly. The males produce pollen, the females produce fruit, and if you only plant one, you get absolutely nothing except thorny disappointment. Most gardening advice will tell you to plant 1 male for every 6 to 8 females. But here's what they don't tell you. The males are completely useless, except for pollination. They're like that one friend who shows up to help you move, but only carries the lightweight boxes. Second problem. Those thorns. Remember how I said this plant is basically barbed wire? I wasn't exaggerating. Harvesting sea buckthorn is like trying to pick berries from an angry porcupine. Traditional hand-picking methods can take hours and leave your hands looking like you got into a fight with a rosebush and lost. In commercial operations, they've gotten creative. Some freeze entire branches and shake the berries off while they're brittle. Others cut whole branches, freeze them, and then strip the berries. There are even custom-made vacuum harvesters that look like something out of a sci-fi movie. But for home gardeners, you're basically committing to either wearing thick gloves and accepting your fate, or getting really good at using scissors to snip off berry-laden twigs. Third issue, and this is the big one, the taste. Sea buckthorn berries are intensely tart. We're not talking, oh, this lemonade could use more sugar tart. We're talking your face just involuntarily contorted, and now you're questioning your life choices. Tart. Raw berries have been described as tasting like a combination of orange juice, pineapple, and battery acid. The acidity level is actually so high that it can damage tooth enamel if you eat too many raw berries. Most people don't eat them straight off the bush. They're processed into juices, jams, sauces, or mixed with sweeter fruits. In Russia and northern China, sea buckthorn juice is as common as orange juice in America. They've had generations to perfect recipes that balance the tartness. But in Western gardens, most people plant one, taste a raw berry, immediately regret their decision, and then complain on gardening forums that they've been deceived. But here's where the story gets really interesting. This plant is virtually indestructible. Sea buckthorn evolved in some of the harshest environments on Earth: the Himalayan foothills, the Mongolian steppes, coastal regions of northern Europe where the wind never stops, and the soil is mostly sand and regret. It grows naturally at elevations up to 14,000 feet, in temperatures that swing from -40 in winter to over 100 degrees in summer. The secret: its root system. Sea buckthorn has a relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria called Frankia. Yes, seriously, the bacteria is named Frankia. These little guys live in nodules on the roots and pull nitrogen directly from the air, converting it into a form the plant can use. This means sea buckthorn can grow in soil so poor that other plants would just give up and die. Sandy soil? No problem. Clay? Sure. Slightly salty coastal soil? Bring it on. This nitrogen-fixing ability also means sea buckthorn actually improves the soil around it. Plant it on a barren hillside, and in a few years, other plants can start moving in, because the sea buckthorn has been quietly enriching the dirt like some kind of botanical philanthropist. The Chinese government has planted millions of sea buckthorn shrubs to combat desertification and prevent erosion. We're talking entire mountainsides covered in these things, holding soil in place and slowly turning wasteland back into productive land. For home gardeners, this translates to a plant that doesn't need fertilizer, doesn't care if your soil is terrible, and laughs in the face of drought once established. It's the gardening equivalent of that friend who shows up to a camping trip with nothing but a pocket knife, and somehow has the best setup by evening. The hardiness zone range is impressive too. Sea buckthorn thrives in zones 3 through 7, which covers most of the northern United States and Canada. It needs cold winters to fruit properly. The plants actually require a certain number of chill hours, those periods below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, to set fruit the next year. So if you're in Florida or Southern California, this isn't your plant. But if you're in Minnesota, Montana, or Maine, this thing will outlive your mortgage. And speaking of longevity, let's talk about the 50-year lifespan mentioned in the title. Sea buckthorn isn't an annual crop you replant every year, or even a typical fruit tree that declines after 20 or 30 years. These plants can produce abundant fruit for 50 years or more with minimal care. There are documented specimens in Europe that are over 100 years old and still producing. Think about that for a second. You plant sea buckthorn in your 20s, and your grandkids are still harvesting from the same plants. It's the investment portfolio of the fruit world. The initial work is front-loaded. Sure, you've got to plant both sexes, wait 3 to 5 years for first fruit, and figure out your harvesting strategy. But after that, it's basically free food for the next half-century. The plants are also incredibly pest and disease resistant. Deer don't like them because of the thorns and the foliage's slightly bitter taste. Rabbits give them a wide berth. Most common fruit tree diseases just bounce right off. There are occasional issues with spider mites in really hot, dry conditions, and some fungal problems if drainage is poor. But compared to the never-ending battle of growing apples or peaches, sea buckthorn is basically maintenance-free. So we've established that sea buckthorn is nutritious, hardy, long-lived, and basically impossible to kill. The harvesting is annoying and the taste is challenging, but those seem like solvable problems. So again, why don't you know about it? Part of the answer is cultural. In Russia, Mongolia, China, and parts of Scandinavia, sea buckthorn has been used for centuries. Traditional medicine in these regions uses sea buckthorn oil for everything from wound healing to digestive issues. It's woven into the culinary and medicinal fabric of these cultures. Russian cosmonauts even took sea buckthorn products to space as a radiation protectant. Whether that actually works is debatable. But the point is, it's deeply embedded in the culture. In the West, though, we didn't have that cultural foundation. When European settlers came to North America, they brought apple trees. grapevines and berry bushes they knew from home. Sea buckthorn wasn't on that list. And once agricultural systems were established, there wasn't much incentive to introduce new, unfamiliar crops that required special processing and had an acquired taste. The other issue is commercial viability. Modern agriculture favors crops that are easy to harvest mechanically, ship well, have universal appeal, and produce quickly. Sea buckthorn fails on almost all those counts for small-scale operations. The thorns make mechanical harvesting complicated and expensive. The berries are soft and don't ship well unless frozen. The taste requires education and recipe development. And the 3 to 5 year wait for first fruit is an eternity in agricultural investment terms. There's also the male-female plant dynamic, which seems simple but gets complicated in commercial orchards. You need the right ratio, proper spacing for pollination. And if a male plant dies, suddenly a whole section of your orchard is unproductive, until you replace it and wait for it to mature. Compare that to self-fertile blueberries or strawberries that propagate easily, and you can see why commercial growers have been hesitant. But things are starting to change. In the last decade, sea buckthorn has been quietly gaining traction, especially in health-conscious circles and among permaculture enthusiasts. Small-scale farmers in Canada and parts of the northern United States are experimenting with commercial production. Specialty nurseries are starting to stock varieties specifically bred for better flavor or thornless characteristics. Yes, you read that right. Thornless varieties exist. They're not common yet, and they're often slightly less vigorous than the thorny types. But they're out there. If you're willing to hunt for them, you can find cultivars that trade some of that indestructibility for the ability to harvest without body armor. There are also varieties bred for specific uses. Some have sweeter berries, though sweet is relative. When we're talking about sea buckthorn, it's more like slightly less face-puckeringly tart. Others have been selected for higher oil content, larger berries, or more compact growth habits suitable for smaller gardens. Let's talk about actually growing this thing. Because if you've made it this far, you're probably either intrigued or think I'm completely insane. Both are valid. First step, get your plants. You need at least one male and one female. Some nurseries sell them sexed, meaning they'll tell you which is which. Others sell seedlings that won't show their sex until they flower in year 3 or 4, which is basically botanical roulette. If you're serious about getting fruit, pay extra for the sexed plants. Planting is straightforward. Sea buckthorn likes full sun. 6 hours minimum, 8 or more is better. As for soil, it's honestly not picky. Sandy loam is ideal, but I've seen these things thrive in what can only be described as dirt-flavored gravel. The one thing they absolutely cannot tolerate is waterlogged soil. If your site has drainage issues, either fix that first or plant somewhere else. Root rot is basically the only common way to kill these plants. And that only happens if they're standing in water. Space them about 6 to 10 feet apart for hedgerows, or up to 15 feet for individual specimens. And while they're not invasive in the CU, this will take over your entire property sense. They do sucker occasionally. You'll get new shoots popping up near the base, which you can remove or leave depending on whether you want a multi-stemmed shrub or a more tree-like form. Watering is minimal once established. For the first year, water regularly to get the roots settled. Remember, this plant evolved in places where rain is optional. The nitrogen-fixing root bacteria need air though, so overwatering can actually harm the plants by suffocating these beneficial microbes. Fertilizer is not only unnecessary, but potentially problematic. Too much nitrogen, especially from synthetic sources, can actually reduce fruiting. The plant is already making its own nitrogen. Adding more is like giving coffee to someone who's already wired. Pruning is where things get interesting. Sea buckthorn fruits on second-year wood, meaning the berries appear on branches that grew the previous year. Light pruning to remove dead or crossing branches is fine, but don't go crazy. Some growers do what's called renewal pruning, where they completely cut down a portion of the planting every few years to stimulate new growth. This keeps the plants at a manageable height and promotes vigorous new shoots that will fruit heavily the following year. In commercial operations, especially in Russia and China, they actually cut entire fruiting branches for harvest. Yeah, you read that right. They prune while harvesting, which solves the thorn problem because you can process the berries off the branch at a table instead of fighting with the living plant. The branches regrow, And because sea buckthorn is so vigorous, this aggressive pruning doesn't harm the plant. In fact, many growers report it increases overall yields by constantly stimulating new growth. For home gardeners, you can take a less extreme approach. Selective pruning in late winter, harvesting carefully with scissors to clip off berry clusters, or even the freeze and shake method, if you have freezer space. Some creative gardeners lay tarps under their plants, give the branches a vigorous shake, and collect whatever falls. It's not perfect, but it beats spending hours with a bucket and punctured fingers. Now let's address the elephant in the garden room. What do you actually do with sea buckthorn berries once you've harvested them? The most common use is juice. The berries are so tart and vitamin-rich that a little goes a long way. Many people mix sea buckthorn juice with apple juice, pear juice, or even carrot juice to balance the acidity. The result is a bright, complex flavor that's surprisingly refreshing. In Russia, you can buy sea buckthorn juice at basically any grocery store, often mixed with sugar or honey. Making jam or jelly is another popular option. The high pectin content means they set up nicely without adding commercial pectin. The bright orange color makes for beautiful preserves, and the tartness actually works well in a sweet jam context. Think along the lines of marmalade, rather than grape jelly. Sea buckthorn sauce is phenomenal, with fatty meats or fish. The acidity cuts through richness like nothing else. European cuisine has been using it this way for generations. It's particularly good with duck, salmon, or pork. The flavor profile is complex, slightly tropical, with that citrusy tartness that makes your taste buds pay attention. Then there's sea buckthorn oil, which is where things get expensive if you're buying it, but essentially free if you're making it yourself. The berries and seeds both contain oil, though they're different types. Berry oil is rich in omega-7 and has a reddish-orange color. Seed oil is high in omega-3 and omega-6 and is more yellow. Extracting it at home requires a cold-press oil expeller or a lot of patience with a solvent extraction method. But the resulting oil can be used for cooking, in salad dressings, or topically for skincare. Speaking of skincare, sea buckthorn oil has genuine benefits backed by research. It's used in treating burns, eczema, and other skin conditions. Some studies suggest it helps with wound healing and reducing inflammation. High-end cosmetic companies charge ridiculous amounts for products containing sea buckthorn oil. Growing your own is basically like printing money, if money were bright orange and required dealing with thorns. You can also dry the berries, though they don't rehydrate well for eating. Instead, dried sea buckthorn berries are often ground into powder and added to smoothies, yogurt, or baked goods. A little powder goes a long way due to the concentrated flavor and nutrition. Some adventurous home fermenters make sea buckthorn wine or mead. The acidity needs to be balanced with sweetness, but apparently the results can be quite good. There's also sea buckthorn tea, made from both the berries and the leaves, which has a milder flavor and is popular in traditional medicine. The leaves themselves are worth mentioning. They're high in protein for a leaf, and in some regions they're used as fodder for livestock. Remember those shiny horse coats from the ancient Greeks? That wasn't mythology. The leaves genuinely seem to have benefits for animal health. Some people also make tea from young leaves, though it's an acquired taste. At this point, you might be wondering if there are any actual downsides to sea buckthorn besides the thorns and the tartness. Well, a few. The plants can sucker aggressively in ideal conditions, sending up new shoots several feet from the main plant. This isn't usually a problem in poor soil, but in rich, well-watered garden beds, it can become annoying. Regular mowing around the plants usually keeps this in check. The thorns are genuinely dangerous. We're not talking about rose thorns that give you a little scratch. Sea buckthorn thorns are rigid, sharp, and can easily puncture skin or even thin gloves. If you have small children or pets that roam the garden, placement matters. This is not a plant you want near a play area. Birds love the berries, which is great for wildlife but less great if you wanted to harvest them. In some regions, you're basically competing with birds for the crop. Netting is an option, but on a large shrub covered in thorns, that's easier said than done. And finally, there's the sex ratio gamble. If you plant from seed or buy unsexed plants, you might end up with all males or all females. The odds aren't terrible, roughly 50-50, but it's possible to get unlucky. This is why sexed plants cost more. You're paying for certainty, but honestly, These are minor inconveniences compared to the benefits. A plant that requires essentially no inputs, improves your soil, produces nutrient-dense fruit for 50 years, and looks beautiful doing it. That's borderline miraculous in the gardening world. So why don't you know about sea buckthorn? Culturally unfamiliar to Western markets, and doesn't fit the easy and sweet profile that most consumers expect from fruit. But for gardeners willing to work with its quirks, it's basically a cheat code. Low maintenance, high reward, and genuinely unique in what it offers. If you're in zones 3 through 7, have decent drainage, and are looking for something different that will keep producing long after you've forgotten you planted it, sea buckthorn deserves a serious look. The initial investment is minimal, the learning curve is manageable, and the payoff compounds year after year. Thanks for watching. If this convinced you to give sea buckthorn a shot, or even just made you curious enough to look it up, drop a comment. And if you've already grown it, share your harvesting tricks. Because clearly we're all still figuring that part out.